Hi, my friends. Welcome to Deep Six, the Deep State. The Mueller indictment of Manafort essentially says that he has nothing better to do. He had to do something because people are questioning how come we're spending this much money and this much time and this much attention on an investigation that seems to be going nowhere. So he indicted Manafort, and there is a sleazy trail there that he uncovered of tens of millions of dollars that were allegedly not declared on his taxes. Allegedly, taxes were not paid on it. The allegation is that he hid it so that nobody would find it, and all of that. But by the way, I just have to wonder. I can kind of understand thinking you could get away with it. But then you take a job as campaign manager for Donald Trump in a national campaign with a secret like that in your closet? Oh, my God. Anyway, poor Manafort has really had it. But these charges have nothing to do with Trump, nothing whatever. The felony in question took place long before Trump hired him. It ended before he started his work with Trump. Trump had nothing to do with it. There's no evidence of that. There isn't even any charge that Trump had anything to do with it. This is strictly, I was investigating Donald Trump, and I saw a Manafort cross the street illegally and get a jaywalking ticket, and that's what I'm prosecuting him for. It's got nothing to do with his original mandate. And the fact that he had to go this far to do it shows how irrelevant his mandate is. He is investigating something that never happened and something that's not there. And therefore, he continuously comes up empty. Now, while he came up empty on this one, he hit real pay dirt in the indictment of George Papadopoulos. Boy, this is the mastermind of this whole conspiracy. A 30-year-old kid who probably never met Trump was trying to get attention to himself in the Trump campaign. And a professor of diplomacy, I think, in a British school, got a hold of him and said, hey, I have evidence, I have dirt on Hillary that the Russians have that they could give you, and maybe implied that he could access the emails. And Papadopoulos was thrilled. This was the chance of a lifetime to get attention and to have people know that he was alive. So he emailed a whole bunch of people in the Trump campaign, very excited. And they probably wrote back, yeah, if there's anything there, go look for it. But that is not evidence of collusion at the highest levels. The kid was indicted because he lied about his meeting with the professor. Shouldn't have done that. He's gotten in real trouble. But this is not the high-level meeting that concluded the arrangement between Trump and Putin, any more than it was for Mueller, the guy who worked for Trump and allegedly, according to the dossier, went to Czechoslovakia, the Czech Republic, to negotiate the collusion deal, and his passport showed he'd never been outside of the United States. So, I mean, this is all absolute fantasy, and what he's attempting to do is to have us believe that this 30-year-old was somehow integral to the conspiracy, indeed the initiator of it, that the Russians chose him as a target and that he proposed it, and nobody believes he ever met with the Russians, and there was no evidence of anything flowing from that meeting, but nevertheless it involved Russia. So of course Mueller pounced. Now, while all of this just goes to show that he has nothing. He's coming up with nothing. He's got no evidence. He's got no case. He's got no events. He's got this huge staff, this embarrassing amount of national publicity and attention, and he's got absolutely nothing to show for it because there is nothing there. I am completely confident that if he squeezes Paul Manafort to get everything Manafort knows, that Manafort will tell him everything he wants to know, but that none of it will relate to Donald Trump colluding with Russia. It never happened. So Manafort didn't know about it because it never went on. Anyway, while all this is going on, there is a very interesting and productive investigation going on, led by Nunes, the ranking Republican on the Intelligence Committee. And Nunes, whose investigation has been scorned in part because he was hobbled by a phony ethics charge in relating to the unmasking, that he solicited information without telling his Democratic colleague on the committee, just sent in to harass him and stumble him. But he has persevered, Nunes, and he's come up with some very important things. The first thing he came up with is that Obama actively unmasked hundreds and hundreds of Americans, including members of the Trump transition team. Now, what unmasked means, as you know, is that their phones were tapped, and in the tapping, they uncovered a conversation between an American and someone who is a foreigner. And when that happens, the FBI or the NSA at that point has to release the transcript within the intel community, but cannot identify the American who is involved. So it becomes Citizen A called thus and such, and Citizen B said thus and such, but you never know who A and B are. And Samantha Powers was first asked about this Susan Rice was asked about this by Judy Woodruff on PBS. And she claimed she was surprised by the unmasking and told Woodruff, "I know nothing about this." But under oath, before Mr. Nunes' committee, Rice recovered her memory and admitted that the unmasking of senior staffers to the Trump campaign had in fact taken place. Then it came out that the committee found out that Samantha Powers, Rice's sidekick, who was the UN ambassador, had made hundreds of unmasking requests of Trump people. During Powers' appearance before the committee, she oddly claimed others were doing much of the asking, even though her name was on the request. Well, that's interesting. That's kind of like Steele, the British agent, saying that the dossier was based on material supplied by others. Well, who were they? And who was doing the asking? Was it the FBI? Was it partisan figures in the Obama administration? Was it the Clinton campaign? And she said that, and the question is, did anyone outside the committee think to ask why a Democratic White House was so free with such sensitive information in an election year and in the transition of a president-elect? So they have really uncovered very important things, Nunes' committee, about the unmasking. And they also uncovered, or forced the revelation, that the Clinton campaign paid for Steele's research for fusion. And they've uncovered a lot about the dossier and its connection with the FBI. And William McBurn of the Wall Street Journal, who I love, wrote, "Did the FBI use the information in the Steele dossier to spy on Trump campaign associates? If so, did it verify the information first?" Now, what that means is that the FBI asked the FISA court for permission to conduct surveillance on Carter Page, who is also a low-level staffer, not staffer, who's never paid, a low-level volunteer or associate of the Trump campaign. And did they use the dossier, which charged that Page was involved in this whole collusion, as well as that Mueller had gone to the Czech Republic when his passport showed he'd never left the country? But their charges against Carter Page were also explicit and also inaccurate. So the question is, did the Justice Department submit the dossier to the FISA court as its probable cause to let them surveil Carter Page? And did it make any effort to verify that allegation? And why would the FBI want to pay for more information from a man doing opposition research for Mrs. Clinton? Why did they offer to pay Christopher Steele money before Election Day to investigate Trump on behalf of Hillary, to try to uncover the Russian connection? Those were important questions, and really they're emerging from the Nunes investigation, but not anything connected to, obviously, Mueller.
Dick, Brian Ward asks, has anyone on Mueller's team been able to quantify the amount of impact Russian collusion had on the election? Even with all this new activity, I still heard nothing towing his activities to election harm.
Yeah, no. There are some charges, but you can assess for yourself how much damage they did. There's a charge that Russian agents posing as Americans put ads on Facebook and on YouTube to spread negative information about the Democrats, to raise everyone's hackles about illegal immigration and about crime and about terrorism in an effort to help Donald Trump. Well, you see internet ads. How much do they affect you? How much do they move you? Are they enough to swing an entire election? Hardly. There's even a report that after the election, Russia TV, or TV, posted through social media a notice of a demonstration to fight the overturning of the election based on the charge of Russian collusion, and that 16,000 Facebook users showed up for the demonstration. And what does that prove? Anybody could do that. There was one radio show that convinced people that the Martians had landed. Everybody in the country went crazy in the 30s. This is not evidence of anything significant, so there is no indication of anything real. The claim is that disinformation was planted. What disinformation? What are we talking about? Not only can this investigation find no input, it can find no output of this alleged collusion conspiracy. It isn't like this happened in secret. It isn't like this was monkeying with the vote count, something we wouldn't know about. But it was in public. It was based on the war of words and the exchange of charges and countercharges that dominated the election and have dominated the politics since. I don't think Russia played any role in that. I don't think there's any claim that was made by anybody that was singly so important that it would have played a role in that.
Hector Morales wants to know, has Powers testified?
Before the House Intelligence Committee, she has. Powers, Susan Power. Yes, Susan, you mean Samantha Power. Yeah, she has testified before the Intelligence Committee. We don't know what she's done in terms of Mueller. Now, at the same time that this indictment of Manafort was announced, the facts that were released in connection with Manafort apply in many ways equally to Tony Podesta, John Podesta's brother. John Podesta was Hillary's campaign manager. Tony Podesta, his brother, and John together set up a lobbying firm after Clinton left office, cashing in on his connections with the Clintons. And John Podesta left the firm a few years ago, and Tony proceeded to represent a big new client, Russia, initially about the Magnitsky Act, the sanctions that were imposed that Putin wanted to get rid of. And Tony Podesta was all over the connection with the Russians, and he remains a very close associate of Hillary's. In fact, Hillary had just had her 70th birthday, and invited guests at the party were John and Tony Podesta. So Podesta admits that he was paid $1 million to lobby for Ukraine, for Yanukovych, the bad guy in the Ukraine, and that he hid it, that he did not disclose it on the form he was required to use. He has just resigned as the head of the lobbying firm that he created. I think it's called Podesta Associates or something. And he wouldn't do that unless this investigation were nipping at his heels. Now, it may, I'm not sure Mueller can go ahead and indict a Democrat, but he may have to shortly, because that's where this investigation seems to be headed.
Dick, Frank Beerfan wants to know, if you think Mueller, is it Mueller or Mueller? I apologize. Mueller. If he will, who he will indict next?
Well, I think that he probably is going to go after Carter Page, who in the dossier they said was instrumental in this collusion. Page was the head of, I think, Merrill Lynch in Russia, and guided investors in Russia who were clients of Merrill Lynch. And he gave a speech predicting, during the election in Russia, predicting that if Trump won, the sanctions in the Magnitsky Act would be lifted. So that led to speculation that he was brokering a deal between Trump and Putin. Now, when that speculation came out, the Trump campaign sent him a letter saying, "You are not an advisor to Donald Trump. You have never met with Donald Trump. He doesn't know who you are, and stop representing yourself as close to the Trump campaign." And that was before any of this came out. So it's a shaky read to go after him, but they might well. He's got to produce some activity because, in effect, his budget is coming up for renewal. And that usually stimulates action in the world of Washington.
Dick, Mark Brown wants to know, can the dossier be thrown out in court?
Well, yes, it can, but it probably will never be admitted in court. I don't think anybody would say that that was evidence of collusion. It's the issue with the dossier now is everybody admits that it was so flawed and so nutty that the question is who put the material there. We know that Hillary paid for it, but who did it? And that's going to be a key question. And then, was the dossier used to guide any of the investigation by the FBI or by the FISA court as grounds for granting surveillance? That's going to be the key question. And I think that's where we basically go from here.
And Tracy Lee Birkland asks, did Tony get immunity?
No. Nobody's had immunity so far. Now, while all this is going on, the tax cut is becoming closer and closer to reality. Trump says he wants to sign it by Christmas. And in effect, either he can or he'll never sign it. Either this gets through quickly or it doesn't get through. There are, as you know, 52 Republican senators, and we can only afford to lose two of them. If we lose a third one, we're cooked. And Ron Paul, who always votes against anything the administration wants and always blocks anything, no matter how constructive, is going to vote no. If you live in Kentucky, please do the world a favor and don't re-elect this guy. Anyway, so he's equally obstructionist to good things and bad things. And he gets reelected by talking about how he obstructs bad things, but nobody points out that he also obstructs anything good that's happening. He just is a routine, everyday vote no on everything. Really constructive. And like a clock, he's right twice a day. But in any case, the issue is going to come before the Senate. And the most controversial provision in the bill is the elimination of the tax deduction for state and local taxes, which many, many people take and which is important to them. Now, that deduction will be compensated for by lowering the tax bracket from 39.6 to 35 for everybody at the top bracket, and for those with pass-through income, which means small mom-and-pop operations that are not big corporations, a reduction to 25%. So it'll more than pay for that. And in budget terms, the revenue it generates will pay for much of the tax cut. But the senators and congressmen from big, high-tax northern blue states are screaming blue murder at the elimination of this deduction. But fortunately, there is not a single U.S. senator in the Republican majority from any of these big states. They were all Democratic delegations. 2 Democrats from California, from Oregon, from Washington State, from Massachusetts, from New York, from New Jersey, from any of the Maryland. The only exception is Toomey, a Republican from Pennsylvania. But Pennsylvania's taxes are not very high. It's a 3% bracket, so it's not a big deal. Now, so that most controversial part of this bill may sail through the Senate. Now, in the House, it's a different story. There are 35 congressmen who are from high-tax states, and they're going to be under pressure from their constituents to vote against a bill that contains the elimination of that deduction. Now, I hope they don't. I hope that they go for the larger national good of lowering taxes and stimulating the economy. Look at how this economy rising is helping everybody. And it'll continue and it'll accelerate if there's a tax cut. And I hope that congressmen like Peter King on Long Island and a bunch of other Republicans from New York and other high-tax states, California, do not obstruct this. We, throughout the United States, helped them get elected. I personally went into a number of those districts in 2010 and did fundraisers for them. We hope that they don't now use their parochial local situation to block us. And let's look at some basic facts here. 70% of the American people do not itemize the deductions at all. And with the doubling of the personal deduction from $12,000 to $24,000 for a family, and from $6,000 to $12,000, another 10 or 15% won't itemize. So for them, they don't care about the state and local deduction. This is a concern only of the top 10 or 15% of the country, and probably a severe concern only for the top 1 or 2 or 3% of the country, or as Bernie Sanders would say, the top 1%. And that is not a basis for legislating. Those taxes are high. They're masked by the federal deduction. They amount to a subsidy from the rest of us to those states for their high taxation. And it's not just that we have to continue to pay for that. And I think that it's important that that deduction be repealed. It's a bold move on Trump's part. Without it, the tax cut becomes unaffordable. And I hope that the Republican congressmen who vote that way are courageous enough to do it and get reelected based on their stand for principle, their stand for the national need to cut taxes and get this economy moving even faster. By the way, the economic statistics are just wonderful here. We now have the highest level of consumer confidence since 2000. And if the tax cut bill fails, that's going to end. It'll fall right down. Prices for home sales are the highest they've been in a very long time. Economic growth is at 3%. House Republicans, if you kill this tax cut bill, it will cost your constituents more in the short term than it would ever cost them in the long term were it to pass. And you know that that's true.
Dick, Ronnie Gill wants to know, do you think that Hillary will be sent to jail?
It's a long way until that. And it just is impossible to predict it. She certainly is at risk. She certainly is more at risk than she's ever been in her life. And she's had 2 narrow scrapes before grand juries. So we'll have to see about that.
And
now, this video, as others, is sponsored by the Patriot Gold Group. And if you look at the horizon, there are all kinds of indications that the gold price is likely to rise significantly in the very near future. Number one, interest rates are likely to go up because the economy is doing so well. The Fed is meeting in a few days to assess that. They're probably going to raise rates again, and that always increases the price of gold. Secondly, oil is coming back because the world is pulling out of the Obama recession, and as it does, it needs more oil, and the price rises. And thirdly, the dollar is weak because Trump has deliberately weakened it in order to improve our balance of trade. And when all of that happens, gold becomes much more valuable, and people rush into it to buy it. So get a hold of the PatriotGoldGroup.com or call the number Renee is going to put on the screen. And if you start investing in gold or silver, they will give you for free $1,500 of silver to start your investment.
And the number is 1-800-476-5675, and I'll be posting it shortly.
Now, one more note on Mueller. He really has to recuse himself. I mean, this guy is so immersed in the investigation of the FBI under his tenure. There was pending before the federal government the question of should we permit Russia to buy 20% of our uranium, okay? And we had evidence that Bill Clinton had gotten a $500,000 payment from a Russian bank to give a speech a few weeks before the vote to approve that sale took place. We knew that the FBI, that the Russians had infiltrated the United States with 10 or 15 agents, 10 actually, who are like that film The Americans on TV, who posed as sleeper agents in the United States, assumed American identities, got married, took jobs, led American lives. And their goal was to get close to Hillary Clinton so that they could influence her to support the uranium sale. And one of them became the chief financial person to Hillary's major Senate campaign donor. He didn't know she was a spy, but she was. She was indicted and convicted and sent back to Russia. And the FBI uncovered 6 years of Russian bribery and extortion attempts to try to win the uranium sale at a political level and at the ground level in the mines and the industrial working. And the FBI said nothing about it. Mueller did not divulge it. There was no communication. Nobody blew a whistle and said, hey, stop this sale. The Russians have been bribing people high and low to get this to go through. Stop it. Nobody did that. And Mueller now should be investigated for that. Probably will be. And should recuse himself from this investigation. So go to dickmorris.com, the link that Renee is posting on the site, and sign a petition for Mueller to recuse himself.
I'll post that petition on the top of the heading when we're done, and people can go right to it. Click on the link.
You hear that? Now, insurers are leaving Obamacare in droves, and Obamacare comes up for re-enrollment, I believe November 1st. I could be wrong, but I think it's tomorrow, or December 1st. I'm not sure. I think it's November 1st. And everybody has to re-enroll if they want to continue. And dozens of insurers are dropping out of the market, taking away choice, or in some cases, making it impossible for anyone to enroll coming from their area. The federal government's insurance exchange and consumers who don't get premium help will see some rates jump by more than 30%, according to a Trump administration report. The data, which came just before Wednesday's launch of open enrollment under ASA, it is November 1st, is likely to add to debate over whether the Obamacare law is failing or is being sabotaged by not extending extra subsidies to keep it alive. That's like saying that the patient was murdered because they wouldn't provide open heart surgery or a heart replacement or some experimental treatment.
Donna Shoemaker-Opper asks, what will it take to get Mueller off the case? And Brandon Altos just mentioned Mueller won't go after the Podesta brothers because that would reflect on the Clintons.
It's very possible that he won't, and it would reflect on the Clintons because you can't get closer to the Clintons than John and Tony Podesta. Witness the fact that with an indictment looming over Tony Podesta's head, Hillary had him at a party last week, which was very unusual. So I think he might not. And for getting rid of Mueller, stay tuned to the House Intelligence Committee and to Nunes' investigation. He's going deeper and deeper into the FBI's relationship to Chris Steele, to Fusion, to the Dossier, and he'll give us a lot of information about that, particularly in the next few days or week. The confidential FBI informant who infiltrated these organizations and reported to the FBI Russia's attempts to bribe to get that uranium is going to testify. Sessions has released him from his confidentiality agreement. And when that comes out, we're going to get more and more. The questions will more and more center on Mueller, and the pressure for him to recuse himself will increase. That is why he indicted Manafort. That is why he's moving aggressively and in public now in a bid to keep his job when these other allegations surface.
Dick, Pastor Ronson Hall wrote in asking, why is the word treason constantly being uttered by left-wing folks? Has our president done anything even remotely resembling it?
No, but Hillary Clinton did. If Trump colluded with the Russians to influence an election in the United States, that I think would be treason. But he didn't. And if Hillary and Bill Clinton accepted bribes from the Russians to sell key strategic materials like uranium mines to the Russians, that would also be treason. And so sometimes it's real, sometimes it's just a highfalutin and fanciful allegation. Now, there was a massive catastrophe in North Korea yesterday. A tunnel that had bored into a mountainside where they had conducted many of their nuclear tests collapsed, and 100 people were killed in the collapse, and 100 more were killed trying to rescue the first 100. That's because the nuclear tests so weakened the mountain and weakened the tunnel that it collapsed. And that may involve the spread of radioactive material, just like Chernobyl did, and just like, I think, Fujikamo, I forget the name of the Japanese nuclear plant, just like that released a cloud of radiation. And it would be very just if it goes over China and they have to pay for their complicity with North Korea in turning a blind eye toward its acquisition of nuclear weapons.
Dick, Patrick Rose asks, when will Mueller go after the Clinton Foundation?
Mueller won't ever do that. He's too close to the Clintons and too much in the tank to the Democratic Party. But if the investigation of Nunes' committee leads to an investigation of the FBI, it will be natural in that investigation to investigate the Uranium One deal, why Mueller didn't talk about that in public when the sale was going through, the Clinton Foundation and why the FBI and Justice Department never investigated that, the Hillary's emails and why Comey pronounced a bill of health for Hillary before she testified and before he'd heard all of the evidence. All of that stuff will then likely come out, and that's when we'll really get at the truth of these situations.
Dick, Doreen Reynolds asks, what would be your plan to get the Clintons?
Well, just what's happening. We just need to take the evidence as Nunes is pursuing it. She has tremendous vulnerability now that it turns out that her campaign paid for the dossier, now that it turns out that she was the object of a Russian espionage plot to get her to vote to sell the uranium, and then she voted to sell the uranium after she got a $500,000 bribe from the Russians. Now, people will say she didn't get it, Bill got it. But then they have a joint checking account, and that it wasn't a bribe, it was a speaking fee. Yeah? And that it wasn't the Kremlin, it was a Russian bank. The Kremlin controlled the Russian bank. So I repeat, she took a $500,000 bribe from the Russians to vote for this uranium deal. And I think the investigations of that pose a very serious threat to Bill and Hillary Clinton.
Rob Costello asks, has anyone considered that Podesta may have worn a wire when he met with Hillary last week?
It's possible. Possible. I doubt it, but it's possible. I don't know if Hillary routinely pats people down when they come in. She never had to pat me down, but that was earlier. Now, listen, if you're looking for a good Christmas present, I would suggest you give a copy of Rogue Spooks, my book about the intelligence community and the attempt to oust Donald Trump to frame this whole thing. It explains the whole dossier. It explains the Clintons' role in it. It explains why the FBI and the CIA were complicit in this whole effort and turned into arms and instruments of the Democratic Party. It explains how Britain promoted this and pushed it and may well have been complicit in it. It explains where Steele came from and what his background was. It goes into everything about this. So get a copy of the book, and if you write Dick Morris Promos, plural,
Yep.
Dick Morris Promos, one word, Promos, at gmail.com. Dick Morris Promos at gmail.com. I will send you a signed bookplate for the object of your affections, the person you're giving the gift to, and I'll be happy to add Merry Christmas, Bob, or Happy Thanksgiving, Joe, or whatever else you want. So please do that. I think it might be a neat gift to give.
Amy Cutler writes in light of Benghazi news today, we caught a militant. What happened to Trey Gowdy's promise to the 4 families justice will be served? Benghazi just forgotten like all the other investigations?
Yeah, I think that Benghazi, well, it's not forgotten. It's been stonewalled. and the investigation ground to a halt. Now, I played a role in uncovering a fact that came out about a month ago on the Tucker Carlson show, that there was a contracting firm that was sent in to Benghazi to take over from the guards that were there a few days before the raid. Now, they hadn't arrived yet, and the old guards were there, and that's what made the takeover of the compound so easy. And Hillary and her people were the cause of the delay in these new guards coming. They were the people who originally chose the firm to guard them that was heavily infiltrated by Al-Qaeda, and told the guards as they were arriving that they must not be armed, so that they had wooden batons to face machine guns. And it is also possible that the major new development is going to come out in connection with Benghazi and Sidney Blumenthal's role, but we're still working on that. I'll keep you posted. Thanks very much for watching, and please share this with folks.
We have one more thing before we close.
Okay.
Our selfie of the day.
Yes. It is to Suzanne and John Bugbee, Bugbee, Suzanne and John. They're going to have a romantic photo, I hope, of the two of them holding the book.
In a beautiful setting in Arizona.
Oh, in a beautiful setting in Arizona. That's cool. Those aren't hard to find in Arizona. And thanks very much for watching.